A visual gameplay update is more than just giving a champion a new coat of paint. It's to improve all aspects of them, from their abilities to their gameplay execution to their visual design to their competitive integrity and even their lore. The best CGUs are the ones that achieve all of these, updating their gameplay in such a way that it feels almost identical to how they were before, but granted far more interaction nuance and playmaking potential. On top of that, the champions themselves are fully redesigned, possibly given a new, more engaging background and story. Done poorly, this could result in destruction of the champion's identity and even possibly controversial gameplay changes. Done correctly, and you're given some of the best champions ever made in the history of League, a testament to Riot's creativity under constraint. No champion has ever exemplified this more than Fiddlesticks, who in the eyes of many might very well be the single greatest visual gameplay update ever made, even beating out the likes of Pantheon, Volibear, Nunu, and Rework. I don't know why it took me this long to make a piece on him, but better late than ever. In today's extremely long-awaited episode of the Rework Retrospective series, we're going to be finding out what about Fiddlesticks was so compelling. Before we get into the video though, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor for today. If you guys ever get the urge to blow something up after a bad game of solo queue, then may I suggest the new game that's coming out on the horizon to blow off some steam, Tyr. Tyr is an upcoming multiplayer competitive tank shooter that has you engage in strategic team battles using, contain your surprise, tanks. Each individual tank has a unique armor profile that can be angled and positioned to deflect enemy shots in battle, with you being able to customize their tech trees, ordnance, and component upgrades on top of that. It's a very position-focused game where you can put yourself in spots to shoot down other players while simultaneously being out of their range and field of vision. Each tank has a distinct ability that keeps the gameplay interesting based on what you're operating, with a good mixture of strategy and reaction timing to outmaneuver your opponents. It's entirely free to play without any pay-to-win aspects and a ton of customization for hardcore players to delve deep into. If you're interested in checking it out, feel free to head on over to their Steam page to add it to your wishlist and join the playtest. It's scheduled to come out this summer, so keep an eye out for it. Thanks again to Tyr for sponsoring the video, but for now, let's get back on topic. I know this is unusual to talk about since I normally focus entirely on gameplay, but I feel like I'd be remiss to not mention it at least a little bit in the video. Visual changes have just as much influence on a rework succeeding or failing. After all, it's in the name, Visual Gameplay Update. More than retrofitting the abilities to be more interactive, the whole point of the initiative was to modernize the appearance of older champions, many of whom were suffering from comically exaggerated and outdated WoW Classic style graphics. I mean, don't get me wrong, I miss the pizza feed as much as everyone else, but when you have a character model like Ninali or Vladimir in the same game as Mel, the discrepancy can start to get really distracting. In the case of Fiddlesticks, to call his redesign a masterpiece would be an understatement. Personally, my favorites are Pantheon and Warwick, but objectively, not a single other trailer drew the same reactions that Fiddles did. The old Fiddlesticks was supposed to be this haunted, murderous scarecrow demon who goes around terrorizing and killing people, aptly named the Harbinger of Doom. And while his old artworks were definitely on the creepy, horror-adjacent side, it was also kind of like, I don't know, funny? Sure, Spectral Fiddlesticks, Bandito, and Dark Candy were on the unsettling side, and Praetorian and Risen are definitely pretty cool and imposing, but insofar as being scary was concerned, nothing about Fiddle was particularly frightening, you know what I mean? In-game it was even worse. His walking and attack animations were so goofy and stiff it felt like a comedic horror and less of an actual horror. Legit, just look at how he walks. He looks like he's having a gay old time instead of being a foreboding terror they wanted to portray him to be, which only made the VGU all the more impressive. Fiddle's background and lore presents a compelling thought. This notion of a haunted scarecrow meant to be the living embodiment of fear, this primordial demon who should make even Shaco and Nocturne look friendly. But when you looked at him in-game, he couldn't be further from it. There was the jump scare factor in his ultimate, but overall, as a character, he just wasn't all that intimidating. They kept everything the same more or less, maintaining his background of being a malevolent serial-killing freak of nature, only they pushed it to the absolute limit. The reveal trailer completely nailed the terror aspect. Fiddlesticks went from a creepy, spooky children's ghost story to a far more palpable horror entity. Everything about him was made so much more freaky. Comparing old Fiddlesticks to the new one, the darker, metallic, ominous, bloody-colored aesthetic and the more disfigured zombie-like body, they literally went and redesigned every single one of his splash arts. Surprise Party always made Fiddle look goofy and funny, and while the new one is still meant to be, pretty cheery and stuff, just the face itself gives off a more psycho killer motif. Nearly all of his skins are meant to be much more intimidating, transforming him into something you should rightfully be afraid of. The voice as well. Mad props to Kellen Goff for sacrificing his vocal cords to produce those shrieking noises. The old Fiddle lines, no disrespect to the original voice, were mainly there to make him sound kind of creepy, right? The new ones though genuinely make him sound horrific, and the visuals, Old visuals had a sickly ghostly shade of green, but overall his animations were quite bright, like the drain tether for example. Even Crowstorm, sure, jump scared you, but it felt like a big glowing circle with a bunch of crows around it. Looking at the new Crowstorm, it is night and day, a vast circle of red and black terror assaulting you instantly, like a void. It was the same exact ability by every measure, but I still remember visibly getting jump scared the first couple times I got hit by Fiddle's new ultimate. He was just so terrifying. On a side tangent, I can't wait for Nocturne's eventual VGU because Nocturne was the OG jump scare with paranoia. He honestly still is. Anyway, back on topic, visual and auditory execution of Fiddle's new design was a masterclass through and through. They not only made him look scarier in artwork and reveal trailers, but made him sound scarier and also look scarier in-game. He went from this cartoonish, creepy scarecrow to something you'd see in a literal horror game. Couldn't have designed it better myself. His new portrayal fully sells the fear aspect of him, even more so in-game. Much like that of Pantheon, Warwick, and Shen, who had a clear premise to what they were trying to do, the goal is to simply take what they were good at and allow them to play into it more multidimensionally. Identical to the aforementioned three, the old Fiddlesticks already had a serviceable playstyle to work with, which could be seen as either a good or bad thing. For irredeemable dumpster fire champions like Poppy, Scion, and Nunu, who were so bad you could basically throw away their old design and start over, for half-decent ones like Fiddle, you have to skirt a fine line. On one hand, having a functioning kit means you have a strong foundation to build off of. On the other hand, that foundation in and of itself can present additional constraints that, if disregarded, can lead to unintentional identity destruction. That can alienate fans of the current design even if ultimately the newer one is more practical, as was the case with Aatrox. In short, they had to find a way to keep Fiddle's existing feel and purpose while changing it enough to make it a noticeable improvement. Fiddle's a very burn-heavy, consistent DPS disruption champion. Several of his attacks are designed with the purpose of inflicting severe crowd control on the enemy team, not solely for the inherent benefits of that crowd control, but also because his main way of dealing damage is over time. To facilitate this, his kit was split into two parts, damage and disability. His primary damaging ability was Drain, tethering himself to a target enemy and literally sucking the HP out of them. Fun fact, Drain was the highest damaging basic ability in the game by pure numbers. If you were able to somehow maintain the entire 5-second channel, a single cast of his W would do 900 base plus 225% AP in damage. As I'm sure you know already, damage over time effects are balanced under the very reasonable expectation that you won't get the full channel up. But even 2 to 3 seconds of drain was enough to inflict serious damage. Obviously, Fiddle needed a way to keep his target still during that time, and so he had Terrify, a point-and-click up to 2¼ second fear. Terrify was, or rather still is by all accounts, Scion's old Cryptic Gaze, a point-and-click ranged hard crowd control ability. What made this one balanced was that the attack itself did no damage, at least initially. Fiddle's attack combo was to Q you and then W while you were stuck in place. Seeing as there needed to be a bit more than that, he also had Dark Wind, throwing a bouncing projectile that would damage and silence enemies hit, possibly damaging the same target multiple times if the crow bounced between two targets, although it would only silence you once. Not half bad a combo, right? You get a silence and a long point-and-click fear and a damaging ability that also heals you. Makes her a difficult opponent to fight head-on as he could drain tank you and stop you from moving or activating abilities. The practicality of his kit was there, which is ultimately the main thing they took to heart. Just one problem though, while each ability individually had the potential for great impact, put together it wasn't as effective as it looked. For starters, Fiddle's main issue is that he had no easy way to actually walk up to people to set up the whole thing. Sure, you could go up and veer someone, but unless you caught someone off guard at close range, you would have to waste half a second walking closer to get within a decent tether spot, and then afterward he would just stand there awkwardly trying to give people the good suck. Additionally, there was something missing with Fiddle. Applicably speaking, Terrify and Drain made sense together as he could lock down a single target and drain their health, but Dark Wind and especially Crowstorm felt like they were more intended for full party-wide engages. Crowstorm in particular is the teamfight 5v5 ultimate, one of the best in the game. It has the potential to do monumental amounts of damage across 5 seconds, and while he has to channel for 1.5 seconds, he gets to blink forward afterwards, allowing him to jump scare the enemy team over a wall. The sheer impact of Crowstorm single-handedly forces entire teams to navigate the rift, hyper-vigilant of any potential angles from which Fiddle could assault you, since tanking even 3 seconds, nay just 2, can still be devastating enough to win you the fight. Moreover, there was the ever-present fear of the immense amount of crowd control he had too. Being stuck for 2¼ seconds and then unable to use any abilities, items, or summoners for another second and change after meant even if Fiddle didn't finish you off, you could bet your ass his teammates did. The problem was still all the same though. Why is an AoE engager's main damaging ability a single target effect? And for that matter, why is it so impractically long of a duration? For tethers like Karma, Nocturne, and LeBlanc, it's reasonable for them to have a long duration since, they can move. But Fiddlesticks can't. More often than not, even with the help of his Q, he would only ever be able to get 1 to 2 seconds of his W max. Enemies would either interrupt his channel or simply walk out of it before he could get anything done. There were 3 issues pertaining to his old version, despite the theoretical benefits of his kit. 1. The previously stated single target and AoE split between his Q and W and Dizzy and Ultimate. Even if he got a 5-man Crowstorm, unless someone else on his team had AoE lockdown like a Malphite, Fiddle would only ever be able to keep one person taking a major chunk of his ultimate. Everyone else could just run away. 2. Having to stand still for even 2 seconds is a long time, let alone the 5 that Train expected of you. You were never going to get that off unless the opponent literally face tanked your entire W on purpose. 3. Despite his entire motif being to surprise you out of nowhere, Fiddle was super easy to deal with in that you could flat out just run away from him as soon as you saw him. All the potential DPS in his arsenal didn't matter when you were called. He has to slowly walk up to you to do much of anything, and even then, he didn't have much opportunity to truly damage all members of the enemy team. They did make his passive Dread give him a small tempo boost that could go along with a 1.5 second channel of Crowstorm, and that was helpful, mind you, but it was overall very one-dimensional. It worked, it just needed to be a bit more nuanced. Reminiscent of Pantheon's situation. Small adjustments to each of his abilities, but enough to completely turn the champion around, vastly amplifying his threat level while at the same time removing the stat-checking nature of his attacks. Creating a champion who transparently plays into a win condition, but damn if that win condition doesn't straight up win you games. To further hammer home the scare factor of new Fiddlesticks, his passive replaces your trinket with fake copies of himself that move upon being discovered. The goal of this passive should be quite apparent. You can use it to play mind games on whether it's a fake chasing the enemy team or actually you chasing the enemy team. Noticeably absent though from this passive is any semblance of combat benefit previously offered by Dread, which was intentional as they shuttled a lot more power into each of his basic abilities. Beginning with Bountiful Harvest, it's essentially the exact same ability as Drain, only now instead of a 5-second duration, it's 2 seconds, it is a far longer cooldown, it restores much less, and its total damage output is a fraction of what it used to be. Compensating for all of that is that Fiddle's W now became AoE, draining the life of everything around him, meaning this attack went from usable only on a single champion to now capable of draining the entire enemy team. Additionally, as a reward for completing the full channel, the final tick of damage would do a staggering amount of missing help. The total damage and healing amount did become more circumstantially contingent, but the payoff was significantly elevated, punishing bad Fiddlesticks players and rewarding good ones. Terrify was also changed in a meaningful way. It still carries Fear, but it now deals current health damage, a fairly small amount. However, they added an incredible playmaking property to it. After being out of combat for 2.5 seconds and in Fog of War against the enemy team, his next damaging ability, Q, W, E, or Ultimate, would fear all targets it for the duration, totally transforming this ability from a nuisance in his old kit to arguably the most dangerous part of his new one. In addition to now being able to fear multiple targets at the same time, the range of applications of his Q were vastly expanded upon. Old Fiddlesticks could do nothing except saunter on over to his target to press Q on them, but now his E could be used to fear targets, and most critically, his ultimate was not just a damaging ability, but a potential 2-second AoE fear, compounding the already insane fear factor it once had. Fiddlesticks essentially went from a battle mage to a hardcore burst mage. What they took away in consistent DPS and streamlined combat, they made up for by front-loading all that divested power into making him a literal 1v5 teamfight engager. He lives and dies by that engage. As he should, Fiddle should become useless after he burns his engage. Once the jump scare is over, the champion should no longer be scary, right? You might think they made him extremely overpowered by adding all this extra % health damage and making his Q AoE and able to proc off any of his attacks, but they also made him fully dependent on that engage, meaning once again, a good Fiddlesticks player can wipe out entire teams on his own with a single well-timed and positioned Crowstorm, while a bad Fiddlesticks player squanders the sheer terror this guy can inflict on the enemy team if he get caught out or pick a lousy engage. They essentially did to Fiddle what they did to Evelyn, change her from an awkward bruiser or DPS attacker into a full-on assassin, powerful when making the first strike, but downright awful if struck against. I think what I find most impressive about Fiddle's new kit is that they didn't overload or overtune him. It may appear like they gave him a ton of free stuff, but they also took away a lot of stuff. For example, Reap gave Fiddle an AoE slow and a more instant ranged attack with good speed and coverage. Dark Wind, however, was a lot stronger of a damaging and harass tool and had potentially more range. The extra pressure put into his Q, W, and E was made up for by his passive being entirely useless in combat. The AoE application of his W and execute component was offset by healing for significantly less than it used to, and also having less overall damage output. Every single thing they gave to Fiddlesticks, they balanced it out by nerfing a different part. And what they added to him, they made sure to frame it so that it's dependent on the player to make the most out of it. It isn't just an unconditional benefit he got by existing. This isn't just a masterclass in visual design or even gameplay design. Fiddlesticks GU was also a masterclass in power budget management, which I feel like is often heavily overlooked and underappreciated. Post-rework, he rarely gets buffed or nerfed, maybe once or twice a year at most. He rarely needs to be balanced, which in my opinion is representative of that consideration for power budget. Never have I seen a champion go from a one-note stat checker to an extreme playmaking demon with a ton of potential damage and engaged pressure who wasn't a balance nightmare at one point or another. One would assume with all the power he has that people would be bitching about him left and right. And while a good Fiddlesticks player definitely forces your team to be ultra paranoid about where you might be, getting blasted by a 5-man crowstorm feels less like you were cheated by 200 years and more like you were just being careless. You never feel helpless against the Fiddlesticks. There is just as much agency you have in avoiding his engage as he does in engaging on you. All in all, Fiddle is just so good of a champion because it not only was an outstanding demonstration of visual and auditory reimagining, but also gameplay and balance. A champion who feels so new yet so familiar at the same time. So practical and so strong in his element yet not overpowering and unfair to play against. There is no other way to put it. Fiddlesticks is the best rework ever made in League of Legends. I hope you guys enjoyed watching today's episode of the Rework Retrospective. If you have, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Rework Retrospective episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.